Hello and welcome to devlog number 4. This one's going out about a week later because I got sick and over the weekend I could not finish this last weekend, so instead I'm showing it this weekend. So the week started with some pretty strong progress towards randomness in spaceships. I got a random library and I did a whole bunch of experiments with different shapes and adding noise to a bunch of different shapes and just trying out random stuff. Literally random stuff. Here I have some of the failed experiments. Doing a different format this week with time lapses of what I did. I don't know if it's going to work. It's taken way longer to actually do this kind of recording, but we'll see. Hopefully it goes well. I hit a really weird bug, Stack Overflow exception. Here I'm relying, I eventually resort to a spreadsheet to work out like where this thing is happening. Because this function goes through a couple million iterations, and I was trying to work out at which iteration it was failing. Eventually worked it out, but then realized that that wasn't the problem. Found the problem elsewhere. Is actually in the original code. I was allocating an 800,000 big array on the stack, and that was kind of killing it. So there's the change. More hideous problems with triangles. Trying to fix stuff and it doesn't quite work. Let's see what happens next. Yep, still a problem. Well, this one is slightly better. It actually looks vaguely like that shape. It's that triangular shape. Ah, there we go. So we have, so these are just random shapes that I'm trying. It's nothing particularly interesting, but I'm just trying different shapes out here. And, you know, trying to get something that vaguely looks like a spaceship. This one looks slightly better. You could imagine one of those discs as a spaceship. Yep, more pointy discs. Great. Things. Okay, so this was one of my most interesting ones that I came up with. No idea what happened. I think I was applying the noise selectively in one dimension. Okay, so this is the final thing that I got to at the end of this is about a week and a half ago. So I applied the noise texture to a sphere. And yeah, so that was my final thing of this particular week. And then I realized that this is not really the tack that I want to be going down. The spaceship idea was great, but it's probably a bit beyond my capabilities. So I decided to start over with a new game idea, simpler, and it includes the old one as a piece of it, what I was working on, but I'm realizing that that's, a little bit beyond me. So I went online and found inspiration and decided to go with this idea. So this is a little render that I made in a couple hours on last week Friday. And yeah, so now I have decided I am going to redo my system, change it up a bit, make it actually work with this new idea of a smaller fixed camera kind of isometric style game. Still going to be farming idea. That's the idea, farming. But yeah, so that's the idea at the moment. And let's get into how that went. So it begins. Here's me creating the new project and sort of copying a bunch of stuff from the old one. I copied all my includes just so that it would be easier to use the libraries. That was a miserable nightmare last time and doesn't actually count as real work. Here's me making the readme. I don't know what I'm doing. If you read it closely, you'll see. Updating my CMake file, some configuration, writing a basic, hello world, and compiling everything, making sure that it works. And then I create my game engine. You can see a bunch of code here going on with the game engine. Yeah, there are many mistakes here. Don't worry about it. I've done so many things wrong. And looking back over the code, it just is painful watching all the things that I've done wrong in this. But, I spent about probably 2 or 3 hours writing this, and then 4 or 5 hours debugging it and trying to work out why it didn't work. Yeah, it took me a while. Yeah, you can see there's quite a bit of thinking time here. This is 36 times speed, and there are still places where I pause for over a second or two, implying that in real life I paused for over a minute. I am actually thinking while I'm doing this, but apparently I didn't think quite enough. So yeah, a large part of this little time lapse is me Googling for how to write arrays and pointers to arrays. This page arrays of pointers, pointer to an array on tutorials point I've read so many times, and it never explains it well. That Stack Overflow answer was really useful. Although I think I pulled the wrong thing out of it. I decided that I'm just going to make everything on the heap, and that's not necessarily the right way, because now, of course, I have all kinds of dangling pointers, which I need to work out. Not all of them are dangling pointers. A lot of them are fine, because I allocate it only once, and there aren't multiple kinds. I don't need to deallocate it because the lifetime of the object is the lifetime of the application. This is an interesting piece of code that I'm writing here. Basically what I'm doing is I'm trying to not re-render meshes. So I have mesh objects, and then I have a renderer which can render meshes. But I don't want to duplicate the creation of the mesh on the GPU. So the OpenGL, so what I'm trying to do is create a hash map, or hash table in C++, which stores the meshes as keys, and then stores the final sort of integer that OpenGL gives us for that mesh object on the GPU as the value. That way it doesn't have to recreate the mesh on the GPU every time it has to render the mesh. It just looks it up in our little table. If it finds it, then it uses that instead of recreating it. Here I'm setting up lighting. Oh yeah, I couldn't work out how to get the lights to not crash. Oh yeah, the problem was that I didn't understand how C++ crashed when objects don't exist. Rather than giving a null pointer, it crashes on a reference to the this object. So if you're in a class method, and you reference the this object or any member of the class, that's when it fails if the object doesn't exist. As opposed to a language like Java or Python or one of those where it'll fail as soon as you reference the object, rather than, long afterwards. I think this is my final debug session where I actually worked it out, or it's close to. Basically what I did was I took the example that I was basing it on, and I copied and pasted the code into my main file until it worked. And then I slowly replaced the code, the pre-built code that they had written, with my own code piece by piece to test each different section of my code to make sure it was actually working. And eventually narrowed it down to the way that I was creating and drawing the meshes, and the fact that I was using a vertex, the way that I was storing my vertices and indices and textures. I was doing it horribly wrong. I still don't know what I was doing wrong, but I was doing something wrong. And eventually it sort of clicked, and so I swapped everything to vectors, and it just worked. And that was the moment where I got it to work. It was just so magical getting that to work. I can't tell you what it felt like 4 or 5 hours later. I was like, wait, what? It works? It was magic. And this is what I've ended up with this week. The lighting is hideous, but the idea of the cubes, and this is all rendered using a sort of generic system. It just creates the cubes and throws them into the renderer, and the renderer just does it. So this is wonderful in terms of the way that I'm very, very happy about this. And yeah, so I'll see you guys next week.